I mean, everything that
he did that in the Obama administration as well.
Oh, absolutely. Like, look, and this might be a good time to just insert a thank you, Obama, if we're going to criticize him. So I don't know if this is a good time to pray, but I will say though, look, the 99%, if you will, that entire movement, there was no better sort of example of the stratification between the 1% and everybody else than the Emanuel administration. And he didn't apologize for it. He was very clear. He believed in, austere budgets. He did not believe in the public sector, which is an offense to someone like me, whose ancestors.
The pervasive influence that certain sectors have over politics in virtually every major city and every town, the National Democratic Party, the Republican Party, real estate, the real estate lobby. How have they set up major hurdles against what you want to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a great perspective, that it's not necessarily unique to Chicago, right? This is a pervasive challenge that we have around the country. I often think about the words of Justice Brandeis 100 years ago. He said that you can either have a democracy or wealth in the hands of the concentrated few, but you cannot have both, right? And we just saw the largest upward transfer of wealth under the Trump administration than we've ever seen in the history of America, right? So their influence, whether it's the real estate lobby and other corporate interests, they have worked overtime, quite frankly, to undermine my administration. In fact, the Bring Chicago Home ballot referendum, again, would have raised $100 million on property that was owned by people who the property was worth more than $1 million. So 97% of people who transfer their property would have seen a tax reduction. 3%, less than 3% would have saw a nominal increase that would have addressed an issue that even corporate interests ostensibly want to address as well, right? And they spent $2-3 millions of dollars against that campaign to distort, right, the effort, and that was a difficult setback to have. Even with my last budget cycle, we challenge corporations to put more skin in the game to balance our budget so that we're not sticking it to working people. And we instituted some great corporate taxes. We have a brand new one, the first of its kind. It's called the Smart Tax. It's the social media amusement responsibility tax. So it's a tax on these large tech companies that have more than 100,000 followers. And essentially the revenue that we would generate from these big tech companies is going to go into our work to expand mental and behavioral health care services. But there was another one that we were pushing for called the corporate head tax. Essentially, it's a tax on big corporations that have more than a certain amount of employees. And again, it would have generated $100 million. And we're talking about 0.5% of the corporations. So we're talking about a handful of corporations that would have generated revenue to address safety, which is the thing that corporate leaders say that they want big cities like Chicago to address. And they spent millions of dollars on ads to influence the city council to disrupt what essentially would have been 1.67% of our overall multi-billion-dollar budget. I mean, these individuals are so greedy in terms of their desire to capture wealth. It's beyond greed. It's avarice, right? Where they don't even want to leave crumbs behind for the rest of us, right? So there's been a concerted effort, not just through corporate media, but through other social media means to disrupt and distort our vision. And then ultimately they've used their dollars and influence to dictate to elected leaders how they should vote, even though their constituency doesn't support the very thing that corporate interests are trying to promote and push through those elected leaders. So for instance, the corporate head tax, 80% of Chicagoans said that it was the right thing to do. And there were 30 alders who rejected it because of the influence from big money and corporations.
Do you ever feel the need to call them out by name? Like, by your assessment, is it appropriate to sometimes do away with that delicate balance?
Yeah.
And to just say, these guys are the ones who are pardon my language, fucking up the bag for you guys, and just come out and outright apply pressure, like not shy away from using the people that brought you into this office, and maybe even using the organizations that have played a role in bringing you into power, and try to fight. I think you probably know why I'm asking this question, because there is another example here of a mayor that ran on this populist momentum, this populist wave against all odds, against the establishment Democrats and the Republican Party, and is now, I think, experiencing a little bit of that. Someone I know personally, Zohran Mamdani in New York. So I'm trying to figure out, like, from your lessons, like, how can we translate that to good governance both in New York and in Chicago as well that benefits the working class?
Yeah, no, I get what your motivation is there. And yes, I do believe that there are appropriate moments when you have to name people, right? And so during the budget battle, for instance, there's an individual who has given millions of dollars to a lot of different politicians, but of recent, it's been very clear that his efforts have been intentionally motivated to disrupt the movement that elected me. His name is Michael Sachs. He's spent hundreds of millions of dollars across the globe. He is a strong contributor to AIPAC, for instance. And so this is an individual that has used his wealth and his influence to undermine the work that we're doing in Chicago. And there are others like him. I do know that people try to strike a balance because, look, there are different instances in which some of these individuals might be on the same page depending on the particular issue or conversation.
Yeah.
My experience has not been the case in this instance where, again, we had 2 administrations ago that, Michael Sachs had a lot of influence in that administration, and that administration closed schools. It shut
Whose
down.
administration was that?
That was Rahm Emanuel. Yeah, and so they closed.
We're going to talk about Rahm in a second. We have to.
Okay, I mean, if you just insist, but you're
Oh, I insist.
Okay, well then granted. But that administration shut down schools.
Yeah.
That administration closed mental health clinics. That administration pushed for privatization. We saw the force out of Black residents in many different parts of the city, particularly the west and south sides, in particular, as it relates to that administration. And Michael Sachs is tethered to that administration. But we also saw, a boy who was brutalized and murdered by a police officer.
Yeah.
And that whole operation worked to cover up the actual murder.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, I do believe that this moment does call for a boldness, and we have to call out these actors and players who are contributing to the demise of society and their efforts to do some goodwill in pockets. It does not cover for all of the damage and harm that they've caused.
Yeah. The reason why I said we got to talk about Rahm Emanuel is because obviously, like, a lot of your work goes into undoing many of the things that he did as the disgraced mayor of Chicago. And the reason why I'm bringing it up also is because he has ambitions of higher office, even though he was sent out in exile as a Japanese ambassadorship. He's back and he seemingly wants to run for president. What would you say about his mayoral reign in Chicago and what that spells for what he is planning on doing if he were to ever get a crumb of power within the Democratic Party?
Look, the Emanuel administration embodied the 1% of society. Everything that
he did that in the Obama administration as well.
Oh, absolutely. Like, look, and this might be a good time to just insert a thank you, Obama, if we're going to criticize him. So I don't know if this is a good time to pray, but I will say though, look, the 99%, if you will, that entire movement, there was no better sort of example of the stratification between the 1% and everybody else than the Emanuel administration. And he didn't apologize for it. He was very clear. He believed in, austere budgets. He did not believe in the public sector, which is an offense to someone like me whose ancestors fought for public accommodations, right? You think about the demands of descendants of slaves, those of who escaped, of course, that brutal institution. Black folks in this country, after securing our liberation, fought for education, housing, healthcare, transportation, good paying jobs. I always add the friendly amendment, which is environmental justice, all the areas, of course, that Donald Trump is attacking and defunding. But that playbook was not introduced by Donald Trump. Right. That playbook was being moved by Democratic mayors across this country. And so you had a very strong privatization agenda that basically wanted to continue to curry favor with the ultra rich. And that has led to the dismantling of the very institutions that working people rely upon. And so, it was just met with his time was, I think, the sort of pinnacle, if you will, of that, not just conservative, but that corporatized form of politics that had embedded its way into the mainstream fabric of the Democratic Party. And then that's what ultimately helped accentuate my radicalization, if you will, as we saw these public institutions being defunded and disrupted, and how the Democratic Party was leading the charge across America of how to do just that. And, the Emanuel administration, again, took that effort and essentially placed it on steroids. And we're still living through the consequences of that.
What are some of the areas that you've had to basically play the role of cleanup job that were the most devastated after this corporate focus in governance?
I think the first area has been around our public education system, right? So democratizing the public education system. We're going to have a fully elected school board by this time next year. That's something that was unheard of. And so as a progressive leader, of course, I'm going to expand democracy. Is it messy? Yes. But I would much rather take my chances with an elected school board than mayoral control, because of what that has meant for working people over the course of years. And so, just recently in my last budget, I released the largest amount of TIF dollars, which is a tax increment financing, dollars that are withheld from the public spaces, used, of course, to bring development, but that development never reached the very communities that it was designed to do. And so every year there's a surplus that previous administrations would just use as a slush fund. Well, I released $500 million into our public schools. So that's part of the cleanup. The Emanuel administration shut down mental health clinics. I've reopened 3 of them. And again, we've instituted this new tax, the social media amusement responsibility tax, to make sure that there's revenue for it. The Emanuel administration dismantled the Department of the Environment. I just want to let that breathe for a second. No pun intended.
Who cares about the environment? Come on.
You know what I'm saying?
We don't have to live on the same earth anyway. We can just go somewhere else if all else fails, right?
No matter how hard they try to figure out how to ship life or the Epstein files to Mars, in the meantime, we're right here on Earth, right? And so I reinstituted the Department of the Environment as another element to clean up. And then, quite frankly, how we generate revenue. So for a very long time, it's fines, fees, property taxes. My push has been that has left our budgets in turmoil. And so the best way to stabilize an economy is to have an equitable distribution of resources, but that also includes ensuring that the responsibility of how we generate revenue doesn't solely rest on the backs of working people.
I think there's one angle that we have to discuss here that I feel like is oftentimes not discussed enough, and that is people of color. Black people and brown people in general comprise a massive percentage of the entire state's students in Chicago, in the Chicago public school system. Mm-hmm. I believe it's 90%?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
between brown and black students. Yeah.
Right? And so when you're actually shutting off funds to the Chicago public school system, you're actually undermining the next generation of black and brown students in the entire state of Illinois. And the same goes for even environmental justice as well, especially because the most underserved neighborhoods are the ones that get impacted the most from a lack of environmental cleanup. So it's not just, I think, in my opinion at least, from where I'm standing, it's not just a war against the poor. It oftentimes has this racialized component as well. People that don't have the opportunity to speak back, people that don't have the opportunity to organize because they're too worried about making ends meet. You're black. As the mayor of Chicago, and Chicago's a very black city, do you feel as though there is also some racial justice that you've brought to the table in combating against these initiatives?
That absolutely, yes. In fact, I've been very clear about my agenda. When we talk about safe and affordable communities, we're talking about the communities that have historically been neglected. And for Chicago, that's the west and south sides of the city.
Yeah.
I live in Austin. It's a community on the west side of Chicago. It used to be the largest concentration of residents anywhere in the city, where we had 100,000 residents in the Austin community. It is still one of the largest neighborhoods. It is one of the largest concentration of black folks anywhere in the country.